Enterprises today rely on technology, control systems, robotics, and automated machinery to deliver high-quality products and services to global markets quickly and cost-effectively. Experts tell us that the next major wave of innovation will center on the expansion of automated processes as industries and organizations look to further drive down costs, improve product quality, and time to market. This expansion, which analysts are calling job or labor automation, promises to deliver unprecedented gains in quality and productivity over the coming decades. Hello, I'm Michael Quinlan, and welcome to our report, Labor Automation, the Next Wave of Innovation. Over the next half hour, we'll introduce you to the concept of labor automation and offer advice that will help viewers understand the benefits and challenges that increased levels of automation will bring to businesses and industries around the globe. This program features expert and consultant Tom Young of Information Services Group. ISG is a leading technology, insight, market intelligence, and advisory services company. The firm supports private and public sector organizations with research, benchmarking, consulting, and managed services to optimize their operational environment and strengthen their business. There are several teaching points in this program. First, we'll define the concept of labor automation and learn about its current business drivers. Next, we'll discuss the technologies associated with labor automation. And then, we'll consider implementation challenges and offer some best practices for success. We'll conclude with added advice from our expert and discuss what the future may hold for labor automation. In our first segment, we'll define the concept of labor automation and discuss current business drivers. In homes, offices, transportation, and industry, we're literally surrounded by automated devices and processes. You can easily say that automation truly makes the world go round. Well, at least let's agree it allows us to reach levels of precision and productivity far beyond human capabilities. In this report, however, we'll take the discussion to another level and learn about the next generation of automation. Now, this is a world where advanced software algorithms enable machines and devices to complete repetitive tasks and operations that up till now have been solely in human hands. Over the next half hour, with the help of our expert, Tom Young of Information Services Group, we'll learn about the potential of next-gen automation and the brave new world it will enable. Tom Young of ISG, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for letting me be here today.
Tom, to get started, define labor automation for us. What is it, and why should we care?
Well, labor automation in a classic sense is not a new topic. We've seen it the last 20, 25 years in the manufacturing sector with the replacement of many blue-collar manufacturing jobs with things like robots and other technologies that have replaced jobs. What we're seeing in the IT community is that same trend now happening with software and algorithms replacing what used to be done by white-collar jobs, and we're starting to see that. It changes the dynamic tremendously. When we looked at the outsourcing waves that have been happening in the IT community over the last, say, 25 years, the first major wave was about labor arbitrage. We had a lot of high-cost jobs that were being replaced with low-cost jobs offshore, and now we're seeing a development where we're seeing more and more of those jobs being replaced by software and algorithms, which has a very different implication in terms of the delivery model.
And what specific types of job tasks are being impacted by labor automation?
Well, basically anything that is somewhat routine can be replaced by a software algorithm over time, especially as things become more standardized. Again, in that first major wave of outsourcing, we saw a lot of customization and complexity moved over into the deal, into an outsourcing deal, and we would call it your mess for less. So and your mess for less was essentially taking your legacy operations with your complexity and just doing it for less with labor arbitrage. What's happening is a convergence of several trends. One is to go more custom, more standardized, more simple, and then that with the advent of some labor automation is allowing for some of those job functions to be automated through labor. A very simple one for everyone to understand is x-rays. For people who've ever broken a bone, 25 years ago you would go and you would have a picture taken. It would be developed. A radiologist at the hospital would look at it and they would determine you broke your wrist. The last few years what's happened is with imaging technology and low-cost bandwidth, they would now take that picture and send it to India, and a doctor in India would look at it and a radiologist would review the reports. What's happening now is they're digitizing the image and software algorithms are reading the x-ray and giving the output. So it has a very different, now you take that concept against all aspects of every function, And in some areas, you can do that today, some it'll be tomorrow, some will be a couple of years from now, but it has a very interesting trend in terms of the way work is procured from third parties in major outsourcing contracts.
So Tom, what's likely to happen on an economic level in terms of the white-collar jobs that will be impacted by this next generation of automation?
Well, again, the concept's not new, but I think what we saw happen in the U.S. space for manufacturing gives us a little bit of a lens into the future about what's going to happen for many white-collar jobs over the next 10 to 20 years. We saw a lot of jobs shipped offshore, and the real issue we had is a lot of the blue-collar labor force in the U.S. had a difficult time pivoting into jobs of equal value from them. So from a political perspective, you have a major jobs issue in terms of retraining and having the workforce be able to participate in new jobs that they can do now, which they couldn't do with the replacement of the low-cost labor. As we start to automate, so to use the radiology example I used before, what does a radiologist do today? It's hard for them to compete with a software algorithm that can do the work. There'll be room for experts, but there won't be room for routine work that used to be done by humans.
Well, tell us about the business drivers behind labor automation. Is this strictly just a money saver?
Well, that's usually a primary driver to many of this, but that's not the only driver. Quality, again, I'll use the radiology example again. If you can eliminate mistakes, humans make mistakes, if you can eliminate these mistakes and improve the quality and throughput, it does matter quite a bit. So I'll use another example for, say, loan processing for mortgages. That's a very labor-intensive process. They would go through credit committees, reviews, looking at credit scores, filling out paperwork and documentation, reviewing that. As that process becomes automated and is done with software, not only can you turn the loan times around so it becomes a low cost, but you can actually move from, say, a 14-day approval cycle down to a 14-hour approval cycle. And so it does compress the business functions into faster time, and faster time is faster money. So at the end of it, it does become economics, but it's not just lower cost, it's improved quality and speed to market.
And Tom, you follow this issue very closely, so please summarize for us the upside and downside of labor automation.
There's going to be a lot of winners and losers in the industry. Some of the key companies that base their business models on reselling labor are going to be challenged if they cannot pivot into a model where they resell software and services and platforms that are not labor-based. When I spoke with a CEO recently of a large firm that had their model largely based on reselling labor, he recognized the trend and actually agreed with the prognostication that things are going to move more to software-defined work, which is going to challenge their firm and other firms like them to make that pivot. It's one thing to recognize the pivot, it's a very different thing to actually be able to act on it and move in that direction. So at our firm, ISG, we have a mapping of firms that are players in the industry today for services, both IT and BPO. And when we look at those services, we see a mapping that's going to change over the next 5 to 10 years. There'll be firms that'll fall off the list, and there'll be a lot of new firms that actually emerge onto the list.
Next, we'll look under the covers and discuss the enabling technologies that support labor automation. Cutting-edge automation and control systems benefit all types of industries, including manufacturing, biotechnology, semiconductors, defense and aerospace, just to name a few. And one example is in the area of laboratory automation. Automated processes in the lab enable workers to achieve levels of productivity and accuracy that would not be possible just a few years ago. In fact, a British university, so impressed with the technology, has recently invested over $1 million in lab automation capabilities. Capabilities that include technology such as Caliper Life Sciences, Lab on a Chip. The chip enables the rapid and highly accurate analysis of liquids. Utilized in chemical, material, and environmental laboratories, the automated processing allows lab workers to not only improve productivity, but to also gather relevant, accurate data earlier in the scientific process. To help us learn more about the technology behind labor automation, let's turn again to our expert, Tom Young. And Tom, tell us what exactly is behind the green curtain as far as technology goes with labor automation.
Well, I think you have a convergence of a lot of events. Again, the early waves of outsourcing, we call it your mess for less, where custom, complex legacy processes were outsourced as is at a lower cost. And that largely relied on labor arbitrage to achieve those lower costs. But as things become more standardized, less complex, and people want to buy things more standard to get a lower cost, once that happens, you have the ability now to automate those standard processes because you have scale. If everything I do is custom, think of use a manufacturing example. If I have a tool shop and every tool I make is customized, I probably have a very difficult time automating that. But if every wrench that I make is the same, it's very easy to automate that. Same's true in the services sector. And so you have a trend of lack of reduced customization and reduced complexity, followed up with the improved analytics that are out there to drive these things. And we use, in the 1980s, software-defined networks redefined the way telecommunications networks were procured by large companies. They used to build out their own private networks, and when AT&T and other services had software-defined networks, they were able to replace that at a tremendously lower cost. If you use the term software-defined fill in the blank, the same trend is going to happen in different pockets of different industries and different functions, and we see that as a major emerging trend that's going to displace a lot of existing service providers, and new ones are going to fill that void.
Now, from what I've heard, big data and big data analytics has an important role here. Could you elaborate?
Well, I think labor automation and big data and analytics sit side by side, and there's a feedback loop there. So as I automate my processes, it makes it very much easier to gather and organize data out of the process to provide analytics to determine how I should be changing the way that I operate. And so it feeds back, and then the automation becomes more sophisticated. So I use this phrase, if we knew that every time it rains on Tuesday people bought tuna fish, we would be able to organize our restaurant operations and our supply chain around tuna fish and tie it to the weather, as opposed to relying on people's intuition and general knowledge. But you take that concept and you apply it to everything, and you start to see how analytics start to feed back the software automation, and the software automation of processes provides more data to do more analytics. And so it becomes a feedback loop, and we start to see very interesting things happen in the industry.
And Tom, tell us, who are the major players here? I'm talking about solution providers and the technology vendor community.
So IBM is the largest service provider in the world today, right now. And they're also probably, at least in my estimation, one of the first movers to recognize this trend. Several years ago, they've shifted their strategy to move more into software and analytics as a driver to their core strategy. And they've moved away from some of the more low-cost services that have a much lower margin. So they were a first mover, if you will, which is not often the case when you see an industry leader being the first mover on a major trend shift like this. Some of the players that are emerging as new players are firms like Google, Amazon, IPsoft, Akamai, and these are companies that are typically not been involved in services for the Fortune 500, especially complex services, but their products that they sell are starting to evolve over time to get into the service space. So you're seeing products that used to be technology products start to evolve to look more like services. And I think what's missing today to make it all come together is a service integration layer to bring it all together.
And who have been the early adopters, and what have they learned about labor automation thus far?
I think smaller firms that are less burdened by legacy infrastructure and legacy processes are more likely to be looking at this as they grow and scale. And they're going to do it to some extent out of necessity. The inhibitor to making this happen is the service integration becomes much harder. So let me use an analogy of building a house. If I can go hire a general contractor and they can take care of everything, right? Or I can start to manage the subcontractors myself. And if I have 5 subcontractors, that's one level of complexity for the general contractor to manage the carpenter, the plumber, the mason, et cetera. But if I go from 5 to 50, now it becomes a very different problem. And that's what you'll see when you see some labor automation and these things happening within the service delivery stacks. So instead of having 5 service providers, I may end up with 50. And how I stitch that all together and make it seamless is going to be the difficult challenge. Because what's going to happen is labor automation is going to happen as point solutions, and they're going to happen at different points of time. So it'll happen, some will happen now, some will happen a year from now, some will be 3 or 4 years from now. But in the meantime, how do you bring it all together?
Next, we'll discuss implementation challenges and offer some best practices for success. The question of what happens to workers who are displaced by automation is a concern that heralds back to the days of the Industrial Revolution. Similar questions are being asked today as we witness the rise of the next wave of automation, labor automation. Questions such as, how will workers be impacted by labor automation? Will jobs be lost? Can workers be retrained and develop new skills? And will labor automation enable new opportunities for workers? All valid questions, but perhaps the jury is still out on many of them. For now, let's ask our interview guest Tom Young for his perspectives on the impact of labor automation and how the implementation of automation systems and technologies should be approached by organizations today. Tom, what do you see as the biggest challenge with implementing labor automation from a technology and also a people perspective?
So let me talk about it from the technology perspective. These service contracts are very difficult to implement from a governance perspective. And as we start to automate different aspects of it, we're going to see that complexity increase. So governance is going to be a very difficult thing to go capture, which is going to be a big inhibitor for buyers. They're going to be concerned about how hard is it going to be for me to manage this and pull it together. At the other end of the spectrum, what happens to the people? What happens to the jobs? It's a real big issue, because as we looked at the manufacturing sector and the automation that happened there with robotics replacing not only low-cost jobs but all jobs in the assembly lines, we saw the difficulty in the Rust Belt for people to pivot from into the new economy. And I think we're going to see the same thing in many white-collar professions. So the challenge is going to be, at least for the U.S., is to figure out how to retrain people into participating in the new aspects of the economy. One of the things that we use as a consultant is we use the phrase, those who know how work for those who know why. And the how jobs are going to give way to this labor automation wave. And so what I encourage young people today, I have kids in college, is to move into disciplines that understand why work is being done, and move into the management and the service integration of bringing this all together.
Well, it seems that some in the media see labor automation as a godsend, while others see it as a job killer. Could you comment on that?
I think where you stand depends on where you sit. A godsend, yes, in one sense, in that it will allow services to continually be offered at a lower and lower price, providing access, people to have access to things that they couldn't have access to before. So I used earlier in one of the examples about x-rays. Imagine x-rays being done at a fraction of the cost, lowering the cost of medical and giving more people access to medical stuff. The issue is going to be, if the jobs go away in the back end, will the people have enough money to actually buy anything? And that is a challenge. I don't suggest to know what the answers are going to be, but I do know that it's going to be a challenge. And as I watched over the last 20 years how it happened in the manufacturing industry, I'm a little concerned that we're going to be slow to make the pivot. The technology is progressing at a nonlinear pace of change, and humans have a hard time getting their heads around nonlinear change and how fast it is. What we'll see over the next 2 years will be less than you think, but what we see in the next 5 years will be much, much more than you think.
Getting a good return on investment is always a key goal when implementing any new technology solution. And what is the ROI story here?
When we look at outsourcing service contracts, typically we would see numbers like 20 to 30% savings when you have a fully implemented labor arbitrage solution. When we look at an equivalent labor automation solution, you might be looking at 60, 70, and 80% of the cost takeout, which is a very different model. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but think of it's very different than labor arbitrage, because you're just doing it, you can figure out what you're doing for less. You're just doing the labor for a lot less, and you can do the math on that. But when you do labor automation, you're actually taking work out of the process and making it, you're doing things that, use the radiology example. How much does it cost for the algorithm to read the x-ray? It's an incremental cost of 0. You just have to figure out how you write that algorithm, and there's a big fixed cost, but once that you hit that, you can crank out the volume at an incremental cost of zero. So the economics are very different. And what I encourage CIOs and leaders to do in this area is to start to be thinking very thoughtfully about what parts of their management operations would they say could be automated, and start to get ahead of the curve and be in front of that.
Now, Tom, for those organizations considering adding technologies associated with automation, could you offer first steps or best practices to get them started?
Yeah, and my answer would be for CIOs and I'll call it CXOs, leaders of different parts of the business, for them to really have a very good understanding of the processes that define their business. What business are they in? What are they doing? And I would have very detailed process maps about how work gets done in their firm. Everything from their customers who learn about them, who want to buy their services, how they enjoy their services, how they pay for their services, the whole spectrum of service delivery within a firm. And I would map that out and understand what processes are being done, how am I using third parties to do those processes, and then where is it likely that I'm going to see radical technological innovation in this area around that. I would leverage third parties to advise me on that journey. No one knows what the answer is going to be. There's not one person who's too smart. I would leverage a lot of third parties and be open to this. And I would then look to understand, using firms like ISG where I work, to help, how do you commercialize this and put this all in a single package? No one firm's going to have the answer, but I think if you ask the right questions, you're going to be in a much better position than those who wait for it to happen to them.
Your firm, ISG, has been following the labor automation story for some time now. And when you're speaking to your clients, what strategies are you recommending to them?
When we sit down with CIOs, CXOs, we often want to engage with them in a strategy conversation about what they're trying to accomplish. And what I would tell all of them is to step back and think through, how are services likely to change in their area in the next 5 years? And that conversation leads to a set of discussions about how they're going to employ service contracts, the use of third parties, in a very different manner. There's a status quo that needs to be managed and operated, but in order for any leader to be in front of this, they need to be thinking a little bit out of the box in terms of how these things are going to impact their business, and position their firm and the service contracts that they have to enjoy these changes and be ride the success wave versus being a victim of this change.
And what sets ISG apart from other firms who follow the labor automation issue?
Well, we probably have the most visibility of any firm because of the service contracts we cut, that I will call are the classic legacy kinds of contracts that are out there, the service contracts. As a result of having the most visibility there, we see where the problems are and where CXOs who are going to engage in a new contract, where they need to be thinking about the next wave. I know that a lot of the contracts that are sitting out there are not going to serve clients over the next 3, 5, 7 years. And I think what I'd like to do is be able to impart that, and my partners and the directors that we have in the field doing this, we want to impart that knowledge and experience to the clients that we serve to make sure that they can be out in front of this. And that's why we would like to talk to them about strategy first and foremost before we get into executing a contract.
We'll conclude with added advice from our expert and consider what the future may hold for labor automation. In this report, we define the concept of labor automation and discussed its current business drivers. We looked at the technologies associated with next-generation automation and consider the challenges faced by organizations as they look to implement these advanced systems. And finally, we offered advice and best practices for organizations considering implementing advanced automation solutions. Next, we'll conclude our program with added advice from our expert and a look at what the future may hold for labor automation in the enterprise. Now, Tom, let me ask you, what excites you most about the potential of labor automation?
Well, it's radical change, and I think it's very exciting because at least in our firm where I work, we have a lot of academic freedom to pursue these ideas and figure out how to bring these ideas and trends to our clients to help them improve their shareholder value and improve the position of their firm. So it's a very exciting time right now. In fact, I've been in the management consulting business for 10 years. This is probably the most exciting time. If you're clinging on to the past and the status quo, it's probably a very scary time. But if you're excited about the possibilities of new things and capturing that, both as a management consultant and as the clients that we serve. If you're excited about those possibilities, this is a great time to be employed. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for people. As I mentioned earlier, there'll be winners and losers. But the winners are going to be defined by people who grab the change and capture it and not try to resist the change that's inevitable.
Okay, Tom, look down the road 3 to 5 years. How are we likely to see labor automation develop and evolve?
I think the next 2 years are going to be a little bit slower than we imagined. I think we're going to see some early adopters. I think we're going to see some early success. We'll probably see some failures as well. Once, though, we get critical mass, it's going to change rapidly. And that's why I think that in 5 years, the amount of change we see will be much more than we think. Almost like a herd who all of a sudden realizes that the game is somewhere else, the herd's going to move quickly. But that game had moved before the herd recognized it. So the game is moving, and I would argue it's moving now. And in a few years, the herd will see that, and it's going to move very quickly.
If there is one key message that our viewers should take away from this program, what would that be?
Have a lot of conversation about this. There is no answer. Nobody has a crystal ball. I would reach out to your third-party service providers. I'd reach out to consultants like ISG to guide you through a dialogue to figure out what's going to happen. It's not going to happen overnight, but it is going to happen rapidly. And we would encourage the clients that we serve to be proactive about this and not reactive.
Tom Young from Information Services Group, thanks for bringing us up to date on this important and interesting topic.
Mike, thanks for having me here. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Well, that concludes our report on labor automation. I'm Michael Quinlan, and thanks very much for watching.